Why did I just say yes to that? I muttered under my breath, staring at the absurdly sparkling engagement ring that wasn't even mine. Across from me, Evami colleague, accidental tormentor, and now fiancé grinned like a cat who got the cream. Because you wanted to. Admit it, he said, his voice smooth and teasing, but with a glint in his eyes that made my heart do an uneven flip. I wanted to protest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to disappear entirely into the floorboards. But the words that came out were, disturbingly, a quiet, maybe I did. Evan leaned back on the couch, one arm draped over the backrest, the other idly brushing against mine. You know, he murmured, leaning closer, this pretending thing, it's starting to feel a lot like the real deal. I choked on a laugh and coughed. Pretending, that's all it is. Pretending, Evan. My voice sounded shakier than I expected, betraying more of me than I intended. Oh, I know, he said, tilting his head, eyes searching mine like he could read through the chaotic jumble of my thoughts. But pretending is easy when the heart isn't involved. And yours, my dear, is betraying you every second. My stomach nodded. How did he make everything sound like a confession wrapped in teasing? Every word, every brush of his hand against mine, made my pulse spike. I tried to focus on anything else, the sound of traffic outside, the hum of the fridge, but his presence was magnetic, inescapable. We had met at work only 6 months ago. Evan was effortlessly charming, impossibly smooth, and infuriatingly attentive to everyone, but for some reason, he noticed me more. I was convinced it was pity at first, until the little looks, the lingering touches, the soft, knowing smiles told me otherwise. And now, it had started with a joke, a ridiculous drunken dare during the office party. Pretend to be my fiancé for the family dinner, Evan had said, laughing, clearly drunker than I was. I'd agreed, half out of embarrassment, half because the absurdity made me freeze instead of refuse. But then the night ended, and the joke lingered. Evan's eyes, sparkling under the kitchen lights, held a seriousness I hadn't anticipated. I don't mind pretending. Actually, I kind of like it. I'd laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. It's just for the weekend, remember? Right? He had said, but his fingers lingered against mine longer than necessary, and I could feel the warmth of his hand like it was setting fire to all my carefully constructed walls. Now here we were. My apartment smelled faintly of Evan's cologne, something woody, soft, and intoxicating. His knee brushed against mine, accidental or deliberate, I couldn't tell. I felt heat rising to my ears, heart hammering in a rhythm that threatened to betray my self-control. You're nervous? Evan said casually, though his voice carried an undercurrent of amusement. Is it because we're pretending? Or because you're realizing this is more than a game? I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words caught somewhere between my teeth and tongue. Couldn't lie. Not really. And Evan's smile widened, triumphant, teasing. See, he said, leaning just a bit closer. I know you better than you think. My breath hitched. His hand warm, confident brushed mine again, lingering a heartbeat longer than it should. I wanted to pull away, but my body refused, betraying my mind in the most intimate, unguarded way. I stumbled over my words, heat suffusing my chest. We're just pretending, Evan. Nothing real here. Nothing real, he echoed softly, almost mockingly, eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made my defenses crumble. You tell me that while your hand is practically glued to mine? I felt my pulse spike. My hand was resting against his, but my mind screamed for me to move it away, even as a thrill coursed through me. He noticed every micro-expression, every flicker of hesitation. Every small, seemingly insignificant touch was loaded with intention, and I was powerless under his gaze. The room felt smaller, charged, like the world outside had vanished entirely. Just the two of us, and the impossible tension hovering in the golden glow of the lamp. I wanted to protest. I wanted to act rational. I wanted to escape, but I didn't move, because even in my fear, In my confusion, I couldn't deny that part of meth part I'd kept buried wanted this. Wanted him. Evan's smile softened. No teasing now, just an intimate, knowing warmth that made my knees weak. You can pretend all you want, he murmured. But maybe pretending isn't far from the truth. I swallowed hard. My heartbeat in my ears was deafening. My hands trembled slightly as I realized how close he was, how much closer I wanted him to be. And in that suspended moment, I understood that what started as a ridiculous dare might just unravel into something neither of us had expected, but both of us secretly hoped for. Days passed, each one a delicate dance of stolen glances, accidental touches, and that unbearable tension that hummed in the air whenever Evan was near. Pretending had blurred into something dangerously close to reality, and every time I tried to draw a line, Evan's mischievous charm pushed me closer to the edge. One evening, after yet another long day at work, he appeared at my apartment doorway, holding a single rose and that signature grin that made me simultaneously want to throttle him and pull him inside. "You left this on my desk," I said, feigning irritation though my heart betrayed me, thudding painfully. "I did," he said, stepping inside, closing the door behind him with deliberate slowness. "But I think it suits you better in person." I groaned but couldn't hide my smile. There was something undeniably intoxicating about the way he carried himself, so confident, so effortless, yet somehow completely vulnerable when he looked at me. "Evan, we can't," I started, but he silenced me with a gentle finger on my lips. "Shoo," he whispered, the words soft and charged. "We don't need words right now." Before I could protest, he leaned closer, the warmth of his body pressing just enough to make my pulse spike. His lips brushed mine light, teasing, almost a question rather than an answer. My hands instinctively reached up, tangling in his hair, drawing him closer until the teasing touch turned into something deeper, something that belonged to both of us entirely. When we finally broke apart, breathless and wide-eyed, Evan's smile was softer this time, almost shy. "I've wanted to do that for a long time," he admitted, voice low and sincere. I laughed nervously, though my heart was pounding with relief and disbelief. "You could have just said something instead of this charade." "Where's the fun in that?" he said with a wink, sliding an arm around my waist, pulling me closer. "Pretending made me realize I didn't want to hide anything from you anymore." The confession made the air around us feel lighter, yet charged with electricity. Every brush of his hand, every lingering glance, every soft laugh shared in our private bubble amplified the intimacy that had been building for months. We spent that night on the couch, curled up together under a blanket, talking about everything and nothing. The barrier of pretend had dissolved completely, leaving only two people who had been circling each other for too long, finally finding solace in the warmth of each other's arms. In the following weeks, our relationship transitioned seamlessly from pretend engagement to reality. Family dinners, office rumors, and even skeptical friends became background noise as we discovered the joy of being unabashedly ourselves together. Each morning began with coffee shared on the balcony, sun spilling over our entwined hands, and each night ended with whispered confessions and laughter echoing in the apartment. Evan had this habit of tracing little patterns on my arm when he was lost in thought, a small gesture that somehow spoke volumes of the care and attention he poured into me. And I found myself reciprocating in little ways, resting my head on his shoulder, stealing kisses when he wasn't looking, sending teasing messages that made his grin widen every time. It wasn't always smooth. There were moments of doubt, fleeting insecurities, and the occasional argument, but each time, we came back stronger, leaning into each other rather than away. Pretending had taught us about boundaries, about desire, about the intoxicating thrill of closeness, and ultimately about trust. One quiet evening, Evan held my face in his hands, eyes shining with that mix of vulnerability and certainty that made my chest ache. "I know we started this as a joke, but I can't imagine my life without you. I want the susto be real, forever." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. I laughed softly, shaking my head in disbelief at how far we'd come. "I feel the same," I've been terrified to admit it, but I love you, Evan, more than I ever imagined. His grin returned, bright and infectious, and he pulled me into a long, lingering kiss that tasted of promises, laughter, and the kind of love that sneaks up on you until it's impossible to ignore. Weeks turned into months, and our relationship deepened in ways neither of us had predicted. From playful teasing to tender confessions, our bond grew stronger, grounded in honesty, trust, and the unspoken magic that had sparked from that ridiculous, accidental, pretend engagement. One evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, painting the apartment in hues of gold and pink, Evan curled up beside me, his head resting on my chest. "You know," he murmured, fingers tracing patterns along my ribs, "I think this pretending thing turned out better than either of us could have imagined." I smiled, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Better than I ever dared hope." In that moment, the absurdity of how it all began, the drunken dare, the accidental agreement, the teasing tension felt like a distant memory, replaced by the undeniable truth of our love. We had found each other in the chaos, and what started as a joke had become something profoundly real. Evan's hand found mine, squeezing gently, and I realized that love, messy, thrilling, terrifying, and tender, was exactly what we had been pretending to discover all along. Only now there was no pretense, only us, and as I looked down at him, smiling up at me with those familiar warm, mischievous eyes, I knew that whatever the world threw at us, we would face it together, heart to heart, hand in hand, laughing at the absurdity of how it all began and marveling at the beauty of how it had become our truth. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with the latest videos.